So I don't watch a whole lot of TV, but Sarah and I recently have been watching this true crime series on the Menendez brothers. Happened a number of years ago. Two boys, they killed their parents. And what was so shocking about it, the reason they're doing this TV special on it is because they were in a wealthy neighborhood, wealthy parents, and we don't assume violent crime will be found in places like that. It's shocking. Nobody does those kinds of documentaries on the sadly routine violence like in the inner city, but when it's found in a place that you wouldn't expect that suddenly we perk up and take notice. I'd like to start by sharing with you guys a verse that, I'll be honest, has haunted me for a long time as a pastor. It's in Ezekiel, and God is describing what happens when the people come to hear Ezekiel speak. In Ezekiel chapter 33. My people come to you as they usually do, and sit before you to hear your words, but they do not put them into practice. Their mouths speak of love, but their hearts are greedy for unjust gain. Indeed, to them you are nothing more than one who sings love songs with a beautiful voice and plays an instrument well. For they hear your words, but do not put them into practice. Man, that keeps me up at night sometimes. The thought of, people show up and they come, week in, week out, and they say, things to pastors all the time, I love to listen to you speak. You did so well today. And yet he describes that they're there and they listen to him like somebody enjoying a good concert, and they applaud at the end, and they go back to their lives as normal. Look, I don't want to be doing some song and dance up here for you guys. I hope you enjoy coming here. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to even say that I don't like when people say, hey, you did a good job this morning. But look, if it's not reaching your heart, if it is not changing your life, we're kind of wasting our time here. And especially that line, he says, these people come, and so they usually sit before Ezekiel. They are in the habit of coming in and listening to the prophet speak. So, think of somebody who shows up to church regularly. Their mouths are filled with spiritual-sounding words, and what do they have inside? They harbor greed and a desire for unjust gain. Let me remind you today that you can come into church every Sunday, every Wednesday when the doors are open. You can sit there and enjoy a good message. You can say, hey, it's great to see you again, and still be harboring evil in your heart. We'll talk about greed today. Greed is one of those, I group it with this kind of group of church sins. Because it's of the kind that people walk in the doors and you won't necessarily notice about somebody when you first meet them. In fact, in our culture, it's not even considered really that bad at all. I mean, it's the American way. We live in an age where a politician can get up and literally say, my whole life I've been greedy, greedy, greedy. I've grabbed all the money I could get. I'm so greedy. And the church claps, yes. More of that. Jesus had many run-ins with the Pharisees. Now, these people were sticklers for the law. Everybody looked up to them as the religious examples, and yet they failed to address the issues in their own hearts. And so Jesus told them in Matthew chapter 23, woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. He describes them, looking really good on the outside, I left one of my water bottles with some leftover protein powder in the car for a week. I mean, it looked shiny on the outside, but it about killed Sarah from 2 rooms away when I opened it to wash it out. And Jesus says, and what's crazy here is this is the Pharisees. These are the religious people. They probably would have pointed to the tax collectors, right? As the greedy people. And yet Jesus says, it is you who are filled with greed and self-indulgence. Greed begins in the heart. Now, we usually, when we think about greed, we think of the external results of it. You know, somebody who's stealing from other people. Like a few weeks ago, there was a Georgetown bank teller had a homeless man come in with a bag full of cash and stole the money from him. We hear stuff like that and we say, oh, that's greed. This morning, I left a $20 bill sitting somewhere on the chairs in here. And you know, I'm not really worried about it being there at the end of service. Because most people, they come into church and they say, oh, no, that'd be greedy. I'm not going to take, $20 sitting out there. But now if it's like taking extra supplies home from work, like that's a totally separate story. We tend to limit the way that we think about greed to outright theft. As something, or we think of it this way, as something that only affects the wealthy. When I describe a greedy person to you, you probably picture somebody who already has a great deal of stuff. And yet greed is an issue of the heart. And because it's an issue of the heart, it is found at every income level. Greed is a desire for more and more stuff, for better stuff, and it is insatiable. It drives people who already live in million-dollar houses. You ask them, what do you want? I want $1 more. I want $1 more. But you find it on the opposite end as well. We have rent-to-own stores. These are driven by greed. Now, the idea of a rent-to-own store sounds firm at the beginning. They say, well, if you can't afford to buy an appliance or something outright, you can come to us and make like monthly payments and pay it off. Until you walk into one of these stores. Have you ever done it, walked into one of the stores? Do they have cheap stuff there? No. No, they have the best stuff there. They don't have little old 3-foot deep TVs. They've got the latest Samsung, the giant ones, so that when the low-income people walk into their store, they look at that and they say, I want that stuff. I don't think I can afford it. And then they go up there and say, well, it only costs you $20 a month for the rest of your life, but it's $20 a month. And the result of it is, on average, people who go into these stores pay at least twice the value of the item. It's greed. And it's greed on both ends. They tickle your desire for better stuff as you walk in the door, and then the people who built this business model, it is their greed that drives them to push those sales in low-income neighborhoods. We also see greed in lottery sales. Do you know how much we spend on the lottery? Here in Missouri alone, it is $1.3 billion a year. An average of $550 per household. That is more than sports tickets, books, video games, movies, and music combined. And again, the lure with the lottery is unjust gain. It's money you didn't work for. And so they hold that out to you, the promise of a better life, and the result is, again, the lowest income people buy the most tickets. Yes. $550 a year. It'll be more because not everybody plays it. And in this area, being the lowest income area, I guarantee you it is higher than that figure. Go down to Casey's sometime and watch the people that come in every single day and drop what could be their life savings and sit there and scratch them away. Because we have dangled before them the promise you could win like $420 million. And I've had people ask me about this before. Well, what if I just bought a ticket out of the blue, right? Just once a year, and I struck it big on the jackpot, and I walk into church and I put $100 million check in the plate. Now, this decision would have to be with the way our church works through the leadership council, but can I just tell you my personal preference would be that you didn't. If you did. I wouldn't be able to handle that money without thinking of all of the families, all of the people who, instead of saving for retirement, instead of paying their bills, all of the wrecked lives that money would represent. I don't want it. Greed destroys people. 1 Timothy 6:10. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. The verse right before that, I forgot to put it in the slide, it says, those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. You hear all those words strung together. Ruin, destruction, a trap, being pierced with grief. Now, a lot of times this verse is misquoted as though money itself is the cause of problems. It's important to remember it is the love of money, which is what greed is. The love of money that leads to all kinds of other problems. In some case, it leads people to wander from their faith. And sometimes it's really, really obvious. There was a Texas pastor not too long ago sent out an email to his church fundraising for, get this, I want to upgrade the blades on my helicopter. Urgent fundraising notice. And if every one of you would just give $52, I'm not asking much. Everyone, just give me $52 to upgrade these blades. I personally guarantee you, I'm not kidding, he guaranteed them, God will give you the car of the type and model of your choice. And we laugh, right? Like that is like so clearly somebody who is, he's not wandered from the faith, he is sprinting dead away from it into unknown lands, just trying to, man, would it be nice to have those kind of problems, trying to upgrade your helicopter blades? Sometimes, though, it's more muddled. It's not as clear the kind of horrible grief that greed can cause. How many of you lost incredible amounts of your savings when the stock market crashed? 2007, 2008. You know, in the lead up to that, it wasn't like, wouldn't it be great if we could just find like the one person responsible for all of that, like take him out and rough him up, like it's all your fault. But what happened was this. It starts with like investment bankers, and they, get paid by commission, so they're greedy and they want to make a little bit more, and so they say, oh yeah, this is safer than it appears. You need to invest in this, and the banks start lending money. They're trying to drive up their profits. So they're giving money to anybody and everybody, and the people who they're giving the money to, they want to go out and buy stuff they can't afford, and so they say, yeah, give me the money, and they buy the stuff that they can't afford, and it's just all the way down the chain until eventually it all blew up. It wasn't one individual person. It wasn't like we could just point the finger at Wall Street. It was all of us. Everybody's greed driving together that caused such grief. A lot of times greed ends up looking like little fish eating smaller fish and bigger fish eating them, and in this chain that goes all the way up to the top. When Nehemiah chapter 5, he returns to Jerusalem after the exile, and he's going there to rebuild the walls that have been torn down. And he goes there and he's facing danger on every side, and he's trying to unite the people, and he gets everybody, you just rebuild this section of the wall, and you got everybody working along, and the whole time, though, he keeps running into problems. And in Nehemiah chapter 5, he describes, as they're all like, hey, let's be a team, work together, this is what's happening. Others were saying, we are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our homes to get grain during the famines. They had a famine, food is scarce. People are running out of money. Still others were saying, we have had to borrow money to pay the king's tax on our fields and vineyards. Although we are the same flesh and blood as our fellow Jews, and though our children are as good as theirs, yet we have had to subject our sons and daughters to slavery. Some of our daughters have already been enslaved, but we are powerless because our fields and our vineyards belong to others. So there is a famine, and there's great need in the land. And the people who controlled the land, what they saw, instead of an opportunity to meet the needs of people who were desperate, they saw an investment opportunity. They saw an opportunity for higher profits. And they said, well, if there's only so much grain, we're just going to jack up the prices. Driving people to the point of selling their kids into slavery after they had sold everything else. You know what they probably said? hey, it's just business. It's just business. Like during the Hurricane Harvey aftermath, you had prices surged in one convenience store. You walk in, they began to charge, just because they could, $20 per gallon of gasoline and $99 for a case of water. And that is what greed looks like. Because they could. And then you have other people, they see people in need. And again, they see poor people who are desperate. I can make money off of them. And so we have payday loan stores. In fact, you can generally go to any area and determine the poverty level of that area by counting the frequency of checks cashed in payday loan stores. Because these are not stores that make their money from the wealthy. They find the poorest and most desperate people who are trying to make rent for the month, and they say, all right, we'll give you a loan at 400% interest or more. And when you can't pay off that loan, well, we'll give you a larger loan and a larger loan. And that is their business model. To take those who are most vulnerable and to turn them into profits. You know, and I wanted to be specific with you guys today because it strikes me so often we are surrounded by a culture, by industries that are built on greed. Prophet Amos called the people out and he said, you sell the needy for a pair of sandals. You sell dust with your wheat. Micah, through the prophet Micah, God told the people who exploited the poor, you are eating my people's flesh, stripping off their skin and breaking their bones, chopping them up like they are meat for a stew. It is in the midst of all of that cheating and grabbing and stealing and every man for himself, I'm going to go out and get what I can, that you have the followers of Jesus who are giving like 10% or more of everything they get away. Which is, by the way, the standard that God gives for our giving. And we look crazy. We should look crazy in a world that is built on greed and exploiting greed. That we would be the ones saying, well, I am giving, just giving it away. I am meeting needs instead of seeing profit as an opportunity. We have to decide who we're going to serve. Matthew 6:24, Jesus said, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Now again, it's not saying that we are sinful for possessing things. We have to make a decision of who we will serve in our hearts. We hear the Bible talk about bowing down to idols. It's sometimes hard for us to understand because in our culture we don't see, people with temples and huge carvings that people are literally kneeling before. And yet, greed, twice in the New Testament, is called idolatry. It is worshiping something other than God as though it were God. It is the only sin by name in the New Testament that is called idolatry. So we say, well, if it can be found everywhere, if it hides itself in our hearts, if it is so destructive, if it will lead me away from God, if it counts as idolatry, how can we prevent it from taking hold in our lives? If greed means that I always want more and more than what I have, contentment says, I am okay. I need nothing else. So when the Bible talks about greed, it always offers contentment as the answer to it. 1 Timothy, right before he warns about the destruction that greed causes, he writes this to Timothy. But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be, there's that word again, content with that. This idea of being satisfied with what you have, again, is so very different than what we are surrounded by. Now, it doesn't mean that we slack off at work, right? I don't even need to try anymore. That we never aim for anything greater. Our motivation is simply different. That we are to have a proper view of wealth, of money, and the things that it can buy. I mean, think about it. If everything you possess right now, and Americans were so crazy. I was talking to somebody who does mission works overseas, and he was trying to get people to sponsor kids for $30-some bucks a month. And he said, "Yeah, I was just driving by, the new storage place in West Plains." He says, "Isn't it crazy about Americans? And we have so much stuff that we have to go and find people to pay to put all that stuff that we don't even know what it is anymore, put it in a box, and we will pay them to hold our stuff for them should we ever want it again." And he said for the same cost that they could be feeding and educating a child in a third world country. But all of your stuff, if it doesn't rust or break or wear out or get sold in a yard sale, when you die, they're not going to pack it into a U-Haul and take it down to the graveyard with you. And it's all just a rental. I've got a rental car right now. You know how hard it's driving that thing? It's just a rental. I just have it for a little while. And here's the thing that convicts me about this. He says, if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Now, a lot of us like to say, I'm content with my life. But I think the bar that we raise for what it would take to make me content, most of us, if we're honest, can we be honest and say it's not just food and clothing? Food and clothing's down here. Come on, if I could just have food and clothing and a good Wi-Fi connection, and if my team would win this Sunday, and let's just make a list and keep adding to it, then I would be content. But come on, just food and clothing. I don't know anybody, honestly, that they could lose everything and have a shirt and a sack of rice and be yeah, this is totally fine. I am happy with this. In fact, a lot of times it's easier to be discontent. And so, again, I understand a lot of people in this area would never describe themselves as greedy. But if the opposite of greed is contentment, the seeds of greed are sown in discontent. And that is easy. You begin to look at the stuff that you have, and you're dissatisfied with it. That door that always jams, never opens right. I remember I had a crack in my windshield one time for 5 years. And I felt a little bit dissatisfied every time I looked at it. We began to look at our neighbor's stuff. We look at our stuff. Why can't my stuff be like their stuff? And it's so easily, it works its way into our heart. We were visiting with family, and we're staying with them, and all of our family back in Virginia worked very good jobs. And it's the small things that you notice, like most of them, every time you're with them, they're eating out all the time. That's just the pattern of their life. And Sarah and I, for a very long time, we have been on the kind of budget where you feel guilty about eating McDonald's because, man, that's so expensive. I bought a $4 bag of jerky yesterday I still feel vaguely guilty about. And so we're with them, and they're not even noticing, the amount on the tab is right. And I had the thought of it must be nice. You ever get a case of those, the it must be nices? You hear other people like complain about some of the troubles they're dealing with, and you think it must be nice. That is not the voice of contentment. That is the voice of dissatisfaction and desire and hunger for more. Hebrews 13:5. Keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have. And it gives the reason we can do this. Because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. So understand, when we talk about like being content with what you have, it is not like you have to try and be happy about your car always breaking down. Like, oh, this is great, like I get more exercise walking. It's not like we're, Christians are like sadistic, we're trying to like enjoy being broke. Yet because God will never leave us, we talked about it last week, the champions of life, no matter our circumstances. That satisfies the hunger that no Ferrari ever could. Philippians 4, verse 11. Now this is going to end in a verse that we hear quoted all the time. Quoted all the time without the context. Quoted all the time referring to everything else but what he's really talking about. Because here's what Paul's talking about in Philippians 4. I'm not saying this. He's writing to a church that had just sent him a donation to help him in his ministry work. I'm not saying this because I'm in need. For I have learned to be, here's that word again, content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. Now that verse, like in some translations, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. High school athletes will pose that like, I'm going to squat 500 pounds. Philippians 4:13. I've never heard somebody say, like, I lost my job. I'm okay. Philippians 4:13. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. Because, man, you go through hard times or really just fighting off the greed that is sold us through our TVs and every outlet all the time. Fighting off that, I think, is more impressive in our culture than what you can bench press. And he said, I can do this in all circumstances. This applies to every one of us. And I think we all can say maybe today that we could be a little bit more content in Christ. So let me tell you this morning, if you go to the grocery store and you're wondering if you can afford enough food to get you through the week, through Christ you can be content. And if you're one of those people that you can just write check after check and never even worry about what's in your bank account, through Christ you can be content with what you have. Let's pray. God, I pray that you would change our hearts. Because it's not the outright thefts. We're not going around boosting cars and breaking into liquor stores, and yet sometimes we look around us and we think to ourselves, I need just a little bit more. I'm not happy with where I am. I want, I need. And your voice calls out to us, your Spirit speaks to us saying that you are what we need. And whether we are well fed or going hungry right now, that we can find that contentment, that peace in you and you alone. In Jesus' name. Mm-hmm.